Hello everyone, my name's Lewis. I'm a second year astrophysics student studying in the UK, and today I'm going to show you how I make my notes on the iPad Pro 11-inch. So this video is going to be split into three different parts. In the first part, I'm going to talk about the equipment that I use for making my notes. In the second part, I'll talk about how I actually make my notes. And then finally, in the third part, I'll talk about how I revise and study my notes. So there'll be timestamps on the screen here and in the description, so you can check those out and skip around the video to whichever part you want to watch. With that being said, let's get straight into the equipment I used to make my notes. So like I said, the main piece of equipment I use for making my notes is the iPad Pro 11-inch. This has completely changed the way that I make my notes ever since I got it about 9 months ago, and my productivity and overall enjoyment of making notes has massively increased since I got this. I've really enjoyed actually the experience of writing on the iPad, and my retention of the information I'm actually writing on the iPad has gone massively up ever since I've started using it. So the reason I've enjoyed writing so much on the iPad and I've enjoyed the experience of writing on the iPad so much is because it combines the best of both worlds, from writing by hand in pen and paper and writing digitally on software like Word. Now, I've used both of these methods to actually revise in the past, and I've found pros and cons for both of those methods. The most effective way of doing it is actually through writing by hand. A lot of research has gone into this and has shown that you retain a lot more information if you write out your notes by hand than if you was to type them up in software like Word. I've always written my notes by hand, and I've always enjoyed doing it by hand a lot more than I have by typing it, just because it can be quite frustrating to type stuff out on Word, especially if you're in the sciences and you've got a lot of equations to write, a lot of derivations and diagrams to draw. They're often really clunky to do in Word, and the formatting is not really the best. But the main problem with Word for me is the limitations and restrictions that it puts on how you can lay out your page. So when you go and type up notes in Word, you're often limited to going left to right or right to left. One of those. You can't really mix it up. You can't split text, part on the left, part on the right, and have like a gap in the middle, and then put a little diagram here, put a picture here, put some equations here and there. You can't split up your page in the way that you really want to. You've got to kind of force yourself to change the way you make your notes to fit the way that Word can format stuff. So obviously that's fine for certain aspects, for certain subjects. If you're doing something like English, I assume that writing your notes out in Word can be a lot quicker because a lot of people can type faster than they write. But if you're in the sciences, or you're doing maths, engineering, physics, chemistry, anything like that, oftentimes you'll have equations to write out, and it's so much slower to do it on a Mac or on a computer than it is to just write them by hand, because again of the formatting. The problem with writing things by hand is the fact you have to remember where you put things. You have to come up with your own organizational techniques and remember how you filed things in the past, so you can always cross-reference. But then you've still got the problem then, if you want to keep cross-referencing, you've got to remember to bring the notes with you, or you've got to remember to keep them in a safe place. So those are the biggest drawbacks between the two methods, but the biggest positive and the biggest advantage of using the iPad is you get the best of both worlds. So you get the handwriting functionality from just using pen and paper, but you get the software side of saving your notes to just one hard drive and being able to keep your notes all in one place. You can even save them to the cloud, which is even better. So I've always found it really useful to be able to save my notes to the cloud, because then I can pull them up on my Mac if I want to just revise them at a different time, or I can even pull them up on my phone as well, which is even more convenient if I'm, say, walking into university and I want to just check over my notes before the lecture. The one thing I would say is this is not like writing on paper. If you're used to writing on paper, it will take you a couple of weeks, maybe even a few months, to get used to writing your notes on an iPad. It's a completely different experience than writing on paper. The screen is completely different. You've got to get used to actually navigating the page, because oftentimes it's a lot harder to just write out with the piece of paper as the full screen. This is obviously not a full A4 sized piece of paper, so you have to oftentimes zoom in and then write out like half a sentence, scroll across, and then finish the sentence. So that's something you've got to get used to. It didn't take me too long to actually get used to it, so it's not the biggest problem. But it could be a problem for you if you're used to writing things out with paper. So that's the hardware side of the equipment that I use. Now obviously you're going to have some software to actually be able to write on the iPad, and for that I use an app called GoodNotes 5. I've been using this pretty much since the start. I have used a few other apps. I've tried Notability, I've tried Microsoft OneNote. I've always kept coming back though to GoodNotes 5, and the reason for that is just because of how intuitive and easy to use it is. The filing system in GoodNotes 5 I've always found to be pretty natural, and what I mean by that is that it follows quite similarly to how files work on PC or on Mac. Other apps have like drop-down menus where there's like drop-downs within drop-downs, which is always really confusing for me. So I quite like the file icon type of sorting system where you can just click into a file and then click into other files within a file, and it all works out pretty natural. The layout of the app itself, you can see, has all the tools on the top. There's not too many tools so that you lose tools and you'd find certain tools completely useless, but there's also enough tools to be able to make creative notes and to make diagrams and to be able to write effectively. You've also got the massive benefit on iPad that you can quickly change between different pen sizes, different pen colors, and you can change between using an eraser and using a pen just with double tapping the Apple Pencil. So it's so much quicker, so much more effective, and features like that is what boosts productivity more than anything. So rather than having to sort through your pens and find which one's a red pen, which one's a green pen, get a ruler out to make a straight line, you can just use the Apple Pencil. You can hold the pencil down to create a shape, and you can quickly double tap the pencil and you've got an eraser, and then you can rub out whatever notes you've made. So it's so much easier to actually write on an iPad, and you can write out a lot quicker than you can on paper. Now bearing in mind I can still write faster by typing on a keyboard, but when you account for the fact that I've got to write equations and I've got to draw diagrams, it's oftentimes way quicker to make a full set of notes on an iPad than it is to make a full set of notes on Microsoft Word. So what you're seeing on your screen now is my reference page. This is a page that I made in my notes to be able to refer back to whenever I'm making new notes or going over old notes, because it means that I can just check the formatting style that I like to use and make sure that I'm following the same convention. So I'll go over this now so you can see the formatting techniques that I use and the way that I actually like to make my notes, and if you are wanting to make your own notes you can kind of follow these along as well if they work for you. So the first thing you'll notice at the top of the screen is the chapter title. These represent every new lecture that I do, so I'll usually have about 10 of these for each of my modules, and this has probably been the most effective organizational technique that I've used in my notes, because it means that, for instance, if I'm struggling on a certain topic or certain lecture, I can ignore everything that comes before this red title, I can ignore everything that comes after the next red title. I'll just have like maybe 4 or 5 pages worth of notes that I can revise and that I need to revise to get my understanding of those topics up to the level that I need them to be. And that's one of the biggest benefits of the iPad as well, is the fact that I can quickly change between different pen functions, pen sizes, pen colors, with a few taps of the screen. Even I can just tap twice on my Apple Pencil and it'll change to a rubber, and then I can tap twice again and it'll go back to the pen. So for instance, like I said, I make the chapter titles in bold, and for bold I use a 0.5mm size pen, and then for my regular size I use 0.3mm if you wanted to follow along with that. So like I said, the chapter title represents each of the lectures, and they are always in red and then highlighted in red as well, just so I can differentiate those between the contents of that lecture. Underneath that then I have my topic titles and my subtitles, so I'll usually have maybe 3 to 6 topic titles for each of the lectures, and those just split up the contents of the lecture a little bit more, so I can focus more narrowly on a specific part of the lecture if there's a certain part that I'm struggling on, and the subtitles split those little topics up even further. Those are usually highlighted in blue, and for the same reason as I make the chapter titles in red, it just means that I can see the blue and I know that that is the topics inside of the lecture, so I know where they each split up. You can see though that the chapter title and the topic title have a little bit of different handwriting than normal. I do this on purpose. It does take a little bit more time, but I think that it makes my notes look a lot neater if I have nice and tidy titles for each of my topics. So the way I do it is I always write my notes in this grid style fashion, this grid template, and I make my titles 2 grids high by half a grid wide. So if I was to write my name, for example, I would write an L like that, which is 2 high, my E like that, W, I, S. It's a little bit rushed, but you can see that it follows the same sort of format as all of my titles, and it just makes things a lot neater. So underneath my titles then, I'll have the general body of my text and the majority of my notes. And most of my notes are just in plain black, non-highlighted writing, and like I said, that's just the background information and general information that's nice to know if I've got time to go over it. If I haven't got time to go over through all of my notes, then I will go over the stuff that's highlighted in yellow, which is important information. And then if I've got even more important information that I'm really struggling on or that I really need to revise, then I highlight that in blue as well. So blue usually represents something important. Then we come on to my equations. Now these are obviously a big part of physics and a big part of maths, and they are important to know. So I always highlight my equations in yellow by putting a yellow box around them. Now you might be wondering, what about derivations? Do I box out all of my equations? And obviously no, I don't do that, because that would just ruin and completely defeat the object of highlighting in the first place. So the point of highlighting is to draw attention to important parts and disregard the rest of the parts that's not as important. So when it comes to a derivation, I will highlight the starting functions, I'll highlight the solutions and the end functions. I won't highlight the steps in the middle though, because those are not as important as the start and finish. So long as I can actually work through it myself, I know what I should be ending up with. So you can see on those equations then I have these small snippets of information added in by red handwriting. What these represent is just little parts of information that perhaps don't warrant a complete new set of information, but just a little snippet to add on to old information. So these will be added onto equations or sentences or definitions, just to add in little information. Perhaps I've added them in after I've made my notes and I can't really reformat my notes, or perhaps I'm just adding them in while I'm making my notes to try and neaten them up a little bit. So for example, if I've got an equation and I can add in or change in a few little terms, then rather than writing out the equation completely again, I will end up just adding in a little piece of red writing, which is enough to draw my eyes to it, but not so much that it's completely taken up new lines on my page, and it saves a lot of space and a lot of time. Then we've got definitions. Those are pretty simple. I just box those in with blue boxes, similar to equations. And then finally I've got diagrams, which I draw by hand, and I use the shape drawing tool in GoodNotes, which is probably one of my favorite features. And what this does is it just takes your pen stroke and it tries to find the nearest shape to that. So for example, if I draw a line, it could be a little bit squiggly, but when I let go, it snaps to a line. Or if I draw a rectangle, I can follow the line and it will fill in the rectangle for me. Now, sometimes you don't want it to be filled in, so one of the features is you can take away fill color. So then if I write another rectangle or draw another rectangle, it won't actually fill it in. So you can play around with these tools, play around with the functions in GoodNotes, and end up making your notes however you really like them. You can format them however you want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a link in the description to where you can download this reference sheet yourself. So if you are looking to make your own notes and you enjoy the way that I make my notes and you enjoy the format that I make my notes, then you can download this reference sheet and keep it for yourself so you can keep referring back to it like I do. But it's all well and good just looking at a reference sheet, but you're never really going to get a good understanding of how these notes look unless you see them in practice. So for that, let's look at one of my lectures, and this is one of my lectures from my quantum mechanics course. And I think quantum mechanics gives a good representation of general notes because you've got a good mix of long form writing, equations, derivations, diagrams, and all the rest of it. So you can see at the start here we've got the chapter title, which is the Schrödinger equation in 3 dimensions, and then under that we've got the first topic in this little chapter, which is the 3D infinite potential well. So unless you're doing physics, you may not actually understand this, but it's completely irrelevant to the way I actually make notes because you don't need to know the topic, the actual topics themselves. But what you can see though is the first set of equations. So you can see that they're highlighted in yellow, which all of my equations are. And then we can see that we've got these little add-ons then in red. So I'm just pointing out that this little X in a bracket is a 3D vector. and then you can see an example of that later on as well. So here we've got terms which, rather than writing this whole equation out again with these new terms in red, you can just see that I've added them in at the bottom, so that it saves space, saves time, and just maximizes my productivity. You can also see that these equations are not actually highlighted in yellow. So the reason for that is because it is kind of like a derivation, or it's just like an explanation. So we start with this starting function here, and then I work through the derivation, expand in certain terms, and then I will highlight the solution. So I've got the solution and I've got the starting function, and I don't really need to learn the steps in the middle because I should be able to just perform those myself. So you can see that that's the first page of this note. The second page follows along pretty similarly. We've got a lot more equations on this note. And then in the third one, we've just got some more information, some more examples of my red additions, snippets, and some of them are writing, just information, and some of them are equation add-ons. So it really is customizable. I like to make my notes in loads of different ways, but I follow the same sort of convention. And one thing you will note is the pages are blank, so what you can do in GoodNotes, which I really enjoy, is you can set a template to start. So I set that grid template, and then at the end, when I finish my notes, I will get rid of the template so it looks a lot cleaner, and then if I want to print out my work, it just comes out on plain white paper. So you can see if I flick through, a lot of my notes follow the same convention. They look a lot similar to the reference page that I use, so I do try to follow it pretty closely, but obviously it's got some sort of creative freedom, so I can format the page, I can put stuff wherever I want it on the page and kind of stick to the format that I like anyway. So that's how I actually make my notes, and like I said, you can download that reference sheet in the description if you want to pick that up for yourself. Now let's talk a little bit about how I actually revise for physics. And there's two main ways of revising in physics. That's practicing questions and revising through notes and textbooks. Now, like I said, I make these notes because I want to have my own personal style of textbook. It's not a full textbook, obviously, but it's a textbook of a module, if you want to call it that. So it covers all the topics in a module in a textbook kind of fashion, just with personalized formatting. Now, there's a big misconception when it comes to revising maths, which is if you make nice looking notes with a lot of maths in it and you read those notes, then you're going to get better at maths. That is completely not true. It's just the same as if you're practicing for playing an instrument. You can't play the piano, for example, and learn how to play the piano if you just read sheet music. You've got to practice playing the piano itself and make mistakes on the piano and learn from those mistakes. And the same goes for practicing physics and practicing maths. You can't just read how maths works. You've got to make mistakes doing the problems, you've got to practice the problems, and you've got to improve through finding where you're going wrong. So the main way I actually revise for physics is doing practice questions, which are often in the back of textbooks or given by lecturers and module organizers. The reason I make my notes and I make them so in-depth is, like I said, because I want to have them as a reference for future use. So the notes are like a supplement for my revision. If I want to revise, I'll oftentimes go through lectures and go through practice questions first, and then if there's certain topics that I'm not understanding, I'm not picking up on, I will use my notes then to try and refresh the topics. Now you might be thinking that actually making notes is a pretty big waste of time then, because perhaps I won't need to have the notes in the future, and you're kind of right, but not 100%. The biggest reason I make my notes is to get that initial understanding, so I don't just copy my lectures and my lecturers' notes when I'm making my notes. I actually try to recall the information that I've learned from a lecture and make my notes from my memory. I'll then check it with the lecture notes, check it with the lectures, and if there's certain topics that I'm missing a lot of information on, or if it's certain topics that I've just got wrong, then those are the topics that I'll remind myself that I need to revise a lot more heavily, and I'll make sure to highlight a lot more stuff in those lecture notes than topics that I'm actually confident with. So these notes are actually the beginning of my revision, so I use these to start off my understanding of certain topics that I haven't seen before, and I'll also use these notes then to refresh myself on topics that I need to use at a future date in a future lecture. So that's how I like to actually revise my topics. Again, the best way that you can revise for physics, maths, and engineering is to actually practice problems, get things wrong, and learn where you're getting things wrong. So by the time you come to the exam, you're not making those same mistakes that you perhaps slip up on quite easily while you're practicing. So hopefully you found this video useful. If you did, I'd really appreciate if you give a like to the video, and if you've got your own suggestions for techniques to study physics, leave them down in the comment section, because I'd love to know of any other techniques that I can use to try and improve my productivity when it comes to studying. Like I said, if you enjoy my content and you want to stick around for more, I'd urge you to consider subscribing to the channel. I'd really appreciate that. But with that being said, I want to say again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.